Good morning. My name is Marilee Hughes, and I'm the coordinator of the Men's Depression and Suicide Network. The Men's Depression and Suicide Network includes 35 researchers, graduate students, and staff working collaboratively to develop, implement, and formally evaluate a suite of men-centered depression and suicide prevention programs. And all of this is made possible with support from Movember Canada. The network is comprised of 5 targeted intervention projects, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our second installment of the network's webinar series, which will focus today on Project 4, Adapting the Veterans Transition Program to Non-Military Clients. I'd like to introduce 3 members of Project 4 team who are with us today, Dr. Marv Westwood, Dr. David Kuhl, and Project Manager Carson Kavari. Following their presentation, there will be an opportunity to ask questions either by logging into Google Plus with a Gmail account, or via email or telephone, and that contact information will be provided at the end of the session. So without further delay, I'm going to turn it over to our presenters.
Thank you, Marilee. Well, good morning and welcome to our presentation this morning. The focus for us this morning is the letting you in on and understanding how our program we're involved with Movember really came about and is connected to the Veterans Transition Program. So just as a reminder, the roots of the current project, let's just go over that briefly. This program began, the Veterans Transition Program began a number of years ago with David Kuhl and myself, and it started way back with meeting veterans from the World War II battles, both World War II and Korean veterans. And so we had run a life review story for them to tell their stories about their military experience before they died. They were 85 to 90-year-olds. And David made comment about that also later on because he and I worked together because he was with a lot of the senior vets at end of life because he was the director of the palliative care unit at St. Paul's. So in getting their stories, they were doing a guided autobiography, a narrative approach to telling stories in small groups with other vets, both men and women, and we were tracking their adjustment and the experience of releasing their stories. And what we found that actually, as they began to tell their stories in these kind of structured groups of guided autobiography, they reported at the end of it feeling quite relieved because they had dropped a lot of the images and stories they had carried for many years. Because as we all know, veterans tend not to feel okay talking about their life experiences to families, but of course they did with the veterans there. To our positive surprise, we noticed things like increase in orientation towards life, more optimism, and so on, having told stories. We were just feeling very good about this. When we presented the results back to them in their characteristic spontaneous fashion, they said to me at the end of the project, well, Westwood, your program's good, but not good enough. It's 50 years too late. It's a tragedy. We had to wait so long to tell our stories. Would you make sure that you offer this kind of program earlier in the life of the returning vet? So with the support from the Royal Canadian Legion, BC Yukon Command, we set about to create the Veterans Transition Program for more recently returning veterans, and that's really where we got the idea and the learning that veterans learn from each other. The program it's primarily men returning vets, and so we also began to realize that you put men in groups. There's the younger vets coming back. They feel at home. They feel comfortable. They're with people who have served, and to our delight, we were able to see the really positive benefits of them moving away from depression, kind of low-functioning isolation into more active engagement. So that just said to us, let's keep this program going. So that has resulted in the Veterans Transition Program, which is now currently not only now offered in this province, but I believe now in 5 other provinces. There's over 430 veterans have gone through this program. But more importantly, our learnings from this program inspired us to join in with the Movember group because it's really men in depression. Men in depression with depression and risk of suicide. It doesn't matter if they're veterans or they're stock traders or blue-collar workers or laborers, men are men in terms of depression, and we all know that men tend to not seek help nearly as frequently as women do. But so this was a group-based approach offering an access for men who want help. So I think that's really links both the Veterans Transition Program to the new Men's Transition Program, which is the Movember initiative. David, did you want to add anything else to that in the origin of the program?
I got involved in this because I had been working in palliative care for a number of years, and there were certainly we provided care for veterans from World War I, II, as well as from the Korean War. And as I studied more and more about trauma and psychology, I realized that we weren't really addressing their wounds or the suffering that they were experiencing. And many of them had been living in the downtown east side, so they were estranged from their families. Many of them had become alcoholics and were also very poor. So we didn't have an understanding of how they came to that because those men didn't talk. And that was part of the estrangement from themselves and from their families. So we were very curious in terms of how could we adapt a life review that Marv had been involved in to the younger men, so that the men who were returning as peacekeepers and eventually from Afghanistan history wouldn't repeat itself with regard to their destiny of poverty, alcoholism, and estrangement from their families. So we were pretty motivated to do something different. So we initially started with just 5 or 6 guys, and we learned with them in terms of what was their experience, and we also learned the language and the understanding of what the military experience was all about. So now, 15 years later, it's a program that's gone national, and we're really asking the question, are the lessons that we learned from that population pertinent to other populations? And we decided that we're going to start by looking at young men who have a history of depression or suicidal ideation, and also older men with prostate cancer. So we're very grateful to Movember for funding this endeavor.
Okay. I mentioned about the research arm of this, and I'm going to ask Carson now just to take you through some of the encouraging findings from our research.
Yeah, no, thanks, Marv. So one way to give us a bit of an illustration of the program success is to look at the numbers. And first thing I'll point out is what we see an N of 52 at this point. Keep in mind that the project has grown quite a bit with a different professor who's taken the reins on this, and it's actually tripled now. So what we're seeing right here is actually grown to an even more impressive number. But to walk you through this a little bit, on this particular slide, we see the entire sample. But if we move forward to the next slide, we see veterans coming in with levels of depression marked up in the severe range. And of course, being part of our project, we recognize the risks of suicide. So when suicide is on the table, and we see a marked reduction in depression from the severe level to almost minimal, we're getting a really clear idea of just the effects this program has. And the other thing to draw your attention to is, well, the P levels, which aren't listed here, are below 0.001. So that means there's less than a 1 in 1,000 chance that this would be attributed to something beyond the actual program itself. Also marked by the Cohen's D, which is an effect size of 1.69. Any stats heads will recognize that's a really powerful number. If we go through a few more slides here, we just see again markers of different levels of which depression they come, and just how far they drop. Just checking out this last slide, we see even when you come in with a moderate level of depression, we're concluding the program with just minimal. Obviously, it just speaks to the success. The last thing I'll note here is in the older project, we're using the measurement, the Beck Depression Inventory, but for a number of reasons, when we've stepped in this Movember project, we've switched to where the research has taken it and where the practice has taken it, and we're measuring male-sensitive constructive depression. So you might be aware that men often express depression in different ways that might not be picked up upon. So this measure taps into things more like levels of aggressiveness, agitation, isolation is a big one for guys. So we're looking forward to having that arm of the project.
Did you want to comment on the dropout rates before we move on, or does that come later?
No, I think it is a good point, Marv. What we're looking at now, the VTP has run through just around 415 or more guys, and we've in that time, quite surprised to say there's a dropout rate of 2. So just a bit of a pause there to recognize that, because in a hyper-masculinized culture, we shouldn't be seeing that. We shouldn't be seeing groups of traumatized men come together and drop out at a rate of 2 in over 400. So.
Right. Okay. So let's take a look at us in action and look at this, the veterans themselves. They wanted this film made. because they wanted other veterans to see it, or other men to know how men can do work in groups. So this is not a simulation, it's an actual working period of the program here at UBC with the veterans and the team, including graduate students as well supporting.
A program at the University of British Columbia offers soldiers a promising therapeutic approach because it allows those with invisible psychological injuries to release the underlying pain. Our cameras have been given unique access to this program, which is funded by the Royal Canadian Legion. It's developed and led by psychologists Dr. Marv Westwood and Dr. David Kuhl.
Soldiers are warriors. They're trained to kill.
The therapy uses enactments of dark moments to help soldiers undo the wiring that military training has implanted in their brains. It also provides skills with which to move forward and learn to live again. Here they are working on a problem that affects so many. Tim has served in Afghanistan and now finds it hard to talk to his girlfriend. He asked director Judy Jackson to role-play her.
But they're my feelings,
But they are my feelings.
and I've learned to not shut down them.
And I've learned not to shut down my
And I
feelings.
won't shut down my feelings with you,
And I won't shut down my feelings with
because
you.
when I shut them down, we both lose.
Because when I shut them down, we both lose.
Is that true?
Yeah.
So pause. Something is inside you right now. Stick with it. Just take it. Just stay there. Yeah.
The course, it completely turns on its head the idea that men aren't supposed to feel. There's the acceptable emotions for a man, sort of anger. You can express that by fighting or by yelling, and that's about it. The rest of the emotions, they're kind of said to you in the military context again, that's your personal problem. Bottle that up inside. Don't go telling other people about it because you're weak if you do.
I was 17 when I left, I got back from the war and I wasn't even 21 yet.
I understand that reconnecting family is a big issue, yeah?
Absolutely.
This is about you and reconnecting with someone important in your family, isn't it? So who is
I
it?
hardly ever go home. They want me to come home all the time. They want to talk to me all the time. I ignore their phone calls, their text messages, because it's just a sense of protection that you have for them. You don't want them knowing your whole truth because you don't want it to affect them the way it's affected me. Probably
Sculpture.
Dan chooses a group member to role-play the father with whom he has been so distant, and his pal Wayne to act as his double.
And when you see this, what do you see? What's he doing?
my dad's ready for me, but I want to be ready, but
I can't.
I can't right now.
Finish this. Look at him. Say to him, Dan, if you stay there, look, he's looking at me.
Dan, if you stay there
Too long.
too long,
I'm afraid what will happen.
I'm afraid that my dad might give up, or I might give up.
Yes.
The connection might be gone
Sorry?
connection might be gone forever.
Forever. Your son's not coming back. What do you have to do?
I have to let him go. I have to let him die. Because I can't bear this pain anymore. My love for him will always be there. Dan, I need you to hear that. I want you to hear that before I turn around.
Yeah.
He's not there.
He's not there. And look at him. Look at yourself. And what do you see there?
I'm still in the same position. And I won't. I've just been holding on to like so many things, and coming into the program, I was really intimidated. First of all, opening up to men that I don't know, and secondly, people judging me and what I've been through.
That doesn't have to do with himself. What could he say that's his truth, and yet not tarnish his dad's soul? Maybe the guys here can help you.
When I came back, I wasn't okay.
Dad, I've taken lives.
Dad had taken lives. That's another one. What else?
Dad, when I came back, not all of me came back.
I don't care about people like I used to. I don't care about people like I used to.
Dad, I've seen and done things that rest heavily on my soul. The only people that can help me is the people that have been there, the people that know. I'm only here because of, the other men that are like me.
So what do you think you'll say to him? Do you want to tell me now, or you just want to come and do it?
Just say the truth.
Just say the truth. Okay? Should we go?
You're by the lake, you're in the water, you're fishing, you're casting.
Remember you told us the story about the wind. Can you feel the wind there? Yeah?
The sun on your face.
Who's on your right? So Daniel, you're back, you're here. What's the worst thing you want to tell me? I'm ready to hear it.
What I need to tell you is that I'm sorry I've been distant from you. And I do love you. But all the shit that I went through, losing my value for human life. I don't want you to see that.
Cut it out. Cut it out.
And nothing kills me more. Knowing that we have this gap between us. But what I'm doing now is releasing my truth to you. With hope that you can carry it like I have. Because I am getting better. I feel a sense of relief and strength.
Of all the things you said, what's the thing you came out of your mouth? That's so important. Just open.
It's the truth.
And you ended the what?
The gap.
And wasn't that why you came today? To know how to break the gap.
I lived with it for 4 years. And if someone would have told me that you don't have to live with it for as long as you think, then, just have the trust. Like it works. Even though it's painful, it's worth the struggle.
A big part of this program is about transition. And I think you've really exemplified how a soldier can transition back to life. It's very inspiring. I've seen you come so far, and you dropped your baggage, but you didn't stop there. Now you're actually you went to the next step. Let's start living again.
We are here for each other. We're here as a group of soldiers, and we know how to talk to each other, and we know how to listen. And there are soldiers out there that aren't in this group that don't know about it.
We can't be quiet about the effects of war, of combat, of death any longer.
there's going to be a change. This is part of it, and the public needs to hear the truth.
Everything's different about my life now. Before I was isolated. I had a hard time just, I was frozen, I didn't have a heart. But doing this program has helped me to unthaw and just become the person that I wanted to be, which is a loving, emotional man.
Just to bring us back to the program moving forward, and just before we head into that, just want to comment that Dan actually a few weeks after that particular session did reunite with his not only his father but his mother and his sister, and he's now moved back across the country and is in continual contact with them. So that's just something that I'd say on Dan's behalf, because this was really his story. All right, so Dave is going to take over now and kind of help link the program from what you just saw to what we're doing with the Movember project, which is underway.
So one of the features of working with men in the military is that they're very comfortable in functioning in groups. So our first day in working with these men is we weave them together by having them tell their stories. The groups that we work with regard to the young men aged 18 to 30 who have a history of depression, or men with prostate cancer, won't have that same experience. But we will use some of the same methods of building a group, so we're going to get them also to do life review. And what we learned from the men in the military is that it's a 10-day program, and by day 7, 8, and 9, often they're raising issues that are very similar to men outside the military. So we will have the advantage also of these men not being traumatized to the same degree, and that we will just begin having them talk about their stories and their lives in a way that precedes their histories of depression or prostate cancer. And as I said, the people, while they want to address their trauma, they also want to come back as civilians. So what we'll be looking at is trying to get the men also to talk about their experience of their illness or their experience of depression and suicidal ideation, to one, normalize their experience, and two, to bring them into community. That is one of the goals of the program. So the common ground, of course, will be working with the two groups. I'll go to the next slide, please. Ultimately, what our goal is now to learn from civilian men to then ask whether we can ultimately work with men who don't have depression or cancer, men who don't necessarily have a diagnosis of illness. And so what we do is we look at the features and characteristics of who men are. And men are very action-oriented. So you saw in the clip that we actually walked around the circle with men. It helps keep them talking. It helps them keep moving. And that men are also storytellers, so we take advantage of that in terms of doing a more formalized life review. And what we'll do is we'll work with them individually, then we'll have them work in teams of 2, dyads of 2, and eventually with teams. So that's the process of working with men, and hopefully ways that they're comfortable with in having worked together with other men through their work experience and through their lifetimes. One of the features of our work is, and that we hope to take to the civilian world, is the whole notion of pathologizing or categorizing men in ways that they have previously been seen as being sick or having an illness. So it's really important that we use different words. So we don't talk about counseling. Men are more interested in having consultation or having coaching. We don't necessarily, with the soldiers, we don't talk about PTSD so much as we talk about a normal response to an unusual event, because it's just what we would expect from them. So Marv comes to this from a psychological background, and I come to this primarily from a medical background with some additional training in psychology. So I'm going to be focusing on the men with prostate cancer. And what we're going to say to them is that whatever their response to their illness is, whatever their response to the treatment, and as many of you will know, it could be chemotherapy, it could be surgery, it could also be medication in terms of hormone blockers. So whatever their response to those are, is there's a physical response, but they'll also have feelings about the consequences or the results of how they are left in terms of in that, especially post-op. It could be incontinence, there'll be erectile and sexual dysfunction. They'll ultimately also confront mortality because it uses the word cancer. These are pretty strong messages for men to deal with. And so we're going to be trying to destigmatize that and make the environment comfortable enough for them to just speak about their experience in a way that will help them as individuals and each other in the group.
Okay. Just want to add on what David's saying there. I think what he's saying is very important about destigmatization. The first thing you know when we're learning about working with men at the intake, or if you think about pre-contemplative, contemplative, the domains about when men seek help or not, if you use any language that's clinical or categorical, suggesting they're flawed or they're defective, they run. They go away. And I'm just going to say Carson very quickly. You could say Carson's recruited all the guys in our first group, which is actually beginning this weekend here in Vancouver, and you meet them off site. Why don't you just comment about where you meet them and the kind of language you use? And it makes such a buy-in difference. But I don't know why we didn't get this years ago.
Yeah.
Just want to comment how you do it.
Absolutely. A lot of the guys approach wondering how clinical the interview is going to be. But we make a point of meeting at a coffee shop, really going to where the guys would be, instead of sort of asking that they change their style to meet a clinical model. So when we do meet at, say, a Tim Hortons or something, the words, the really clinical words about treatment, they don't even enter the conversation at any point. We focus a lot on, well, tell me a bit about yourself. What are some of your goals coming in? Oh, so they're actually quite surprised. In my last interview, one guy was very forthcoming about how some insecurities as socially, and when he was confronted with the fact that it was actually quite a strength and a courage to do that, and that would be a resource to the group, he was shocked. He's like, it is? So there's a lot of strength confrontation, and avoiding those clinical labels, really focusing on the strengths.
Yeah, and just to finish this, before we go back to David here, what I think, like as a psychologist, of course, we'll talk about level 1, level 2, mild, moderate depression, and clinically they are. There's no doubt. That's what's the criteria to get in the program. No one's questioning that. But when you move to the interaction, I find it very helpful working with men to think of men as a different culture. And I'm talking about traditionally socialized men. It's really helpful. It's like a cross-cultural therapeutic situation, and when you're doing cross-cultural work, what you do is you're sensitive to those domains. So that's one thing we're learning right now. And when David and I met with the prospective people in Eastern Canada, the older men, I suspect it's part of the same, but we don't need to say so much about that. I just wanted to add on what you said. And by the way, John Agrandachuk on our program uses a term consulting. The patients, the clients prefer to see, I think in your work, as John is, yeah, you're doing consulting. That would be a very good example. Okay.
Thank you. So these are basically features that you already saw. You saw the therapeutic enactment. We will also begin each group. We don't go right into enactments like that. We make sure that the whole group comes into a sense of being together and a sense of belonging. We do that by providing opportunity for them to have a guided autobiography, which means that they'll write a page or two about events that have contributed to who they are with regard to their life experience, and they will then speak those into the group with other people listening, followed not by suggestions or recommendations, but more just a response about the impact that one person's story had on the others. And we move from that, from the life review, then to therapeutic enactment.
Which is action-based, isn't it?
Which is action-based.
Very action-based, yeah.
So we'll wonder how much we will get into this, but about the neuroscience behind not only TE, but overall just group work. But I found in my experience sometimes talking with the guys, again, talking about, if you think about trauma as a normal response to an abnormal situation, when you bring it into the realm of the brain, anxiety can become a lot less mystified when your amygdala is reacting really, and it's firing up really strongly for a good reason. And when you start to actually make it clear that there are neuronal changes, there's changes happening in the brain when you do this group work, it takes therapy into a frame of mind more like kind of customizing a machine or some hardware, and it becomes more about working with your model instead of this kind of counseling domain. So I found the neuroscience is actually quite useful from a theoretical perspective, and also for actually building a relationship.
Yeah, and just on that point, we find it helpful with many of these clients if you explain kind of the science of change in ways that's very concrete and specific. They find that they can accept that more easily when they have an explanation of what they're going to do for this hard work.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
As already described, it's going to have two populations, young men aged 18 to 30, and then men that it'll be post-prostatectomy. We'll also include men that are 1 year post-diagnosis and 1 year post the chemotherapy. So it'll be very open. We're looking more for men that already have an experience of what it's like to live with the prostate removed or prostate treated in different ways.
So I think we're pretty excited right now that the project is sort of snowballed. Snowballing a good expression? Anyways, it's built on itself is what I'm trying to say. And we've built up relationships with people really across the country now. Actually, this has expanded even since this slide was created. But while higher ed has been one of the centers we've connected a lot, different institutions, we've now got film schools interested in referring clients, and private clinicians throughout Vancouver, and again in Quebec and Halifax. So we've just seen a lot of support, urologists, post-prostatectomy support groups. And as we did say, we're launching in a week, in 5 days, we're launching our first one. And the text is green for a reason. Everything is all set up. We've got everything in place. So good. Yeah. If we didn't cover this, the 10-day Veterans Transition Program is streamlined. We're not working with a traumatized population generally, so we're running for 2 3-day weekends. Once again, delivering in 3 provinces, so that's 6 groups total. And in terms of assessment, we're going to get the richest data, of course, from qualitative interviews, which gives us a lot of freedom in what we do. But we're also got a quantitative component where we're measuring very, very key constructs such as masculine depression, the kind of endorsement of traditional or hegemonic masculinity, and one with consultation with our own group is self-compassion. This is it's a hot and important thing we're going to be including as well. So just a bit of a sense of some of the important things that are happening right now. The bolded text referring to the actual delivery of the programs. You get a sense for things starting to heat up. We're excited to be training all of our clinicians. 8 guys out east will train in Montreal for a big smattering of deliveries in Movember. In actual November, we're going to be delivering to the older and the younger guys out in Quebec and Nova Scotia. I think we've largely covered this.
Yeah.
Is there anything you want to add here?
No, we're set for this weekend. That's notice it's a nice retreat site in the Botanical Gardens, so there are not a lot of distractions, and yeah.
And while we commented about the military program, the veteran program was residential. This won't be residential, so we're going to spend the days with the participants, but they'll all go to their homes to sleep.
Yeah.
Montreal, we just mentioned our collaborator out there at McGill University. It's helping us to get set up for our groups out there. Once again, we've specially trained clinicians on board in the whole model, but working with men, but particularly life review and therapeutic enactment, which is a very rigorous training. So
I just think at that point you'll notice, Jack is out here for our conference, and it's just great having people in other parts of the country that we're connected with in our network, because he's gone out of his way to get the clinicians in place, start getting the men involved. But McGill University is also being generous in giving us space and kind, and they're on board. That university is excited about it, as is the next slide. Is it about Acadia? Yeah, and same with Ron Lair in Wolfville, Nova Scotia. He was out here for the conference. He's setting that up for us up there. Canada University is also contributing in kind to the Movember project, as is UBC. And I really want to mention that 3 post-secondary institutions in Canada here are just behind our program very solidly, and it makes the work so much easier when you get backing from the faculty and staff at these 3 institutions.
Mm-hmm. So from that point, we really covered where things started with the veterans program, where things are at, and the transition to working with these new subgroups. And is there anything Marv or David wants to? No, that's it.
That's it for me.
So.
All right, so we'd like to open up the webinar to our Q&A session, and there's a couple of ways that you can send in questions. One of the options is to actually log into the Google+, and so you'd need a Gmail account to do that. And if you don't want to do that, or you don't have a Gmail account, you're welcome to post your question directly to one of our staff members, either via email at mds.net@ubc.ca, or by telephone 604-822-5061. So we'll just pause for a few minutes while we're waiting to hear those questions from our viewers, and feel free to contact either of those or post your question directly to Google+.
Is there anything, Mary Lee, you wanted to comment or ask about as someone who's been overseeing this project?
To put me on the spot. Right?
You're very interested in the project. Is there anything you want to say?
In terms of the group numbers,
yeah.
You talked about kind of staying away from dyads. Or what kind of numbers did you select, and is there kind of the rationale for how many people is optimum in a group?
With these groups, optimum would be 8 to 10. We're going for 10 because we want to get as many people into the program as possible.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes time limited when you invite people to give a life review, because you don't want to cut them short, especially the first time through,
right.
Because that's one way they get self-confident, and they also build trust in the group, which is an essential ingredient for them to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll have to watch the time carefully, but that's the reason that we work with 10. In the military, we work with 6 to 8, but they've got other features in terms of the trauma to address. So we're confident that we'll still be comprehensive, and everybody will get the opportunity to tell their story.
Okay. What? Do you know where they are? Let's see.
Well, I have a question.
Oh,
yes.
okay.
When you were approaching the clinicians, the ones that you will end up training, what was sort of the most compelling hook to them to sort of buy into this program?
Very good question. First, we had to train the clinicians that we approached how to talk to us.
Yeah.
But what do you think, Carson? You were there. What do you think why they bought in? I mean, I have some ideas. What do you think?
Yeah, of course. I think you're referring to the people out east that would be trained up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, number one, half the buy-in was done because these are guys who are already very interested in working with men in groups. So to see that there's something there's been a need for a long time, something kind of exploding more into the mainstream, half the buy-in work is already done there in a sense. So they're getting an opportunity to be trained in something they're passionate about, and that's on the uprise in terms of the overall trends in this area.
The other thing that's compelling, in addition to having a personal professional interest, is when they finish the program, they will be qualified under our supervision to deliver the program. And Movember, in our year 2, knowledge translation, it goes the way I anticipate there's going to be a need in society, and they'd be the first clinicians that we would recommend.
Yeah.
So they could have another professional sphere to their life.
So we have one of our first questions here is from Megan Schellenberg, who's with the Mental Health Commission of Canada, and she's asking whether there are participants required to develop safety plans that extend beyond the group setting, or what kind of external supports do you offer to participants?
Yeah, very good question. The safety plans are, as we mentioned, most of them are referred to us by counseling centers or whatever, plus some are self-referred, but after we do the assessment and intake, we inform them all the services available to them once the program is finished, or in each individual case, we will make recommendations to link them up to professional counselors or psychologists or clinical social workers as needed, absolutely post-group. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just just to add to that, while we've got a very concrete sense of the clinicians. We do recommend beyond it. That being said, there's other different venues where they get support following it. Beyond the formal recommendations, maybe to do continued individual work, they often form a group amongst themselves, which is a social resource. And there are even sometimes opportunities for members to come back and participate in future groups in a paraprofessional role, where they might be able to join these.
And all the clinicians, including ourselves, are registered in our own provinces in the professional associations, whether it's medical or psychological. We have a duty to follow up with them also. But the Dr. Stefano and they are also on site in those regions, so they'll work with their clinicians to ensure safety and follow-up.
So we have another question here from Lulu Barkins. What do you anticipate as the biggest challenges to working with non-military men as you transition to this different population?
I think the challenges may be different. We're talking about men with prostate cancer is a generation of men that believed in doing it on their own. They often go into isolation, don't talk about their problems until their problems are solved. And there's a lot of grief in terms of the changes that have happened to them. I'm generalizing, men don't easily express grief publicly. So I think the biggest challenge will be to work from the individualism that probably exists in each of the participants and the sense of isolation, because many of them will have lived with this for months to years. And so to create a safety where they can actually talk not just in descriptive terms in terms of their experience, but in terms of their emotional and the actual experience from within, I think will be the challenge, to make sure that the group is safe enough for them to explore that conversation with their other men who had similar experiences. I think will be a very significant challenge. And soldiers are also very reticent to speak in public, especially to psychologists and physicians, so it won't be totally foreign to us.
In addition to what David said, the challenge to civilian men might be that military clients, both men and women, and there's been one program completed for women, but they already work in groups, they know how to back one another in groups, and so they're a little more group familiar in that sense. However, most of our populations with the military, we call, had trauma-related injuries, whereas this population doesn't. So that's going to be something that's probably a little bit easier for us.
And another concern that they've already raised, we've been in conversation with programs in Montreal as well as in Halifax, and one of the concerns for some of the men who work in the prostate cancer support group is that they felt that 3 days in succession times 2 was a lot. So we've reduced the program from 10 days to 6 days, and they expressed some concern about expecting men to be away from their homes for 3 days at a time and to ask them to do that twice. So that also will be a challenge. It's asking them to change their routines.
So I have another question here from Marianne Nurmi, who asks, you mentioned including a measure of self-compassion. Can you explain how or why you decided to include this as well?
Yeah, so this was done based on consultation and some conversations we had. Neff's scale, the self-compassion scale, is the one we ended up deciding to use. At one point we were going to go ahead and measure shame, sort of being an important construct. But looking at it, the pathological labels associated with it were a bit of a red flag and a bit of a put off. And then just going into the literature and looking at how self-compassion's been used more, I had first influenced by somebody on our team, Corey McKenzie, who's doing work with that out over at a different institution. And then I had a talk with another Matt Engler Carlson, who works in the area of men, just to further concretize the benefits of using self-compassion. So just being that it's, number one, finding its way more into these type of studies, and it's so central in terms of its association with moving away from the more negative outcomes. It was one of the constructs we decided to use. So.
So we have another question here from Dr. John Olaf, and he's wondering if you can say a little bit about the use of art therapy with military men within the BTN.
Yeah, of course. As you recall, we learned in our first round with the BTP that clients, as we call them, participants, they really like action methods and less verbal clinical methods. So what is a perfect option here is we use enactment kind of performing self. Well, what do artists do? Artists express themselves with the different kind of mediums available to them, whether it's sculpture or paint or photography. So in a very kind of initial pilot project with Foster Eastman down at the Eastman Galleries, he worked with a group of our graduates, of our veterans, and they produced some very kind of important art pieces for the public, I guess, but primarily it was highly therapeutic and integrating for them. And so in the process of making the art, the sculpture, and the painting, the photography, they would talk to the coordinator, who is David, about their experiences in coming back into being healthy again, and that was indeed very helpful to them. The third part I want to say, in reference to John's question, we're pretty excited because of our affiliation with this program in Australia at the Flinders University, because David and I have delivered this program in Australia, and the research is going on there. But what they're doing is taking it one step further in the arts. They're doing a theater piece, drama education, where with professional actors, some of the soldiers themselves will join that company, and they will take part in a play that, in fact, the play right now, you can go online and see it. You can see clips of the previews. It's called The Difficult Return. And so now theater, performing self, in addition to sculptures, in addition to painting, photography, looks like a fairly a good approach to helping men in particular express themselves, given that they don't often like to talk a lot.
Great, thank you very much. Do we have any more questions that are coming in?
No.
Yeah.
Do you want to switch to the slide just quickly?
Sure.
Just as a reminder to our audience, if you don't want to log into Google+, you can email mds.net@ubc.ca or phone 604-822-5061. And we have about 5 more minutes, so if you have any final questions, please feel free to send that in right away.
Andrew, is this recorded? So we have a copy of this?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Also, as a reminder to our audience that this session will be archived and posted to our YouTube account.
Yeah.
So anybody who wants to watch the session again or share it with colleagues, we'll send out the link for that as well.
Okay.
So we got another question here from Larry Mraz, and he wants to know if you're still recruiting.
And I would assume, I'd wonder if Larry meant, I don't know if he can send a follow-up, if he meant for our upcoming one as of next week, or if he meant in the future.
Does he mean this week, I wonder?
Yeah, so I mean, we could clarify that, but I will say that for the one coming up, I'm at the point where we're basically full, but there is still actually a chance to get on board and it would be on a wait list basis, but there actually may still be a chance to get in. So I would highly recommend contacting me. Again, my contact info was up there. We can put that up again, Larry. And if you did mean in the future, if you meant either anything out east, or if you meant the post-prostatectomy group in September, they're wide open still. So there's many opportunities to get on board. So there's a maybe for next week, and then there's for sure spaces in the future. Of course, that's right there, carson.ubc.ca. Just give me a ring.
All right, it looks like we've answered all the questions that have been submitted. I just wondered if the team here would like to end with a few final words before we close the session.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to spend some time with you. We're very excited about the future and integrating what we've learned, and we'll learn new lessons as well that we didn't learn with men in the military, and hopefully this will have a significant impact not just on the groups that we're running through this project, but that will also follow to be a new service to young men with mild to moderate depression and men with prostate cancer.
Yeah, my comment would be that because Movember is funding projects that have direct impact, I'm looking forward to next year how we translate the findings that we've got into clinical settings and practice and new kind of arenas where clients of this nature can attend. Lastly, about this project that all of you out there should know is the way that John Olaf has set it up and his staff, which includes people like Andrew, Mary Lee, and others today. The way that they've been working with us and providing the support service makes our work really easy to do, and I want to thank them for that.
As do I.
Makes working fun.
I do too. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you to our remote audience who joined us today. Again, a reminder that this session will be available on the Men's Depression and Network YouTube site. Thank you.
Thanks.